give some background about hearing in general and some considerations for listening to music and what are some of the differences between music and speech. So we'll go over some technical stuff, but we'll go over some like conceptual stuff too, just to kind of see um, what's the differences between hearing and listening. So advance my slide. Okay, so this is me and my wife, Avonlea. We met at UOP, and this was our grad school graduation picture. So, yeah, so my background, I do have a degree in music, so that was how I got started in audiology. It was really I have a deep understanding of sound and appreciation for sound. Really, um, I used to play I played drums for a punk band for about 10 years, and so during that time my ears were ringing, and so it got me thinking about, okay, maybe I'm doing something wrong here, because I shouldn't I don't want to damage my hearing because music is my life. So I started thinking about how I could still enjoy playing my music but protect myself too. And um then I decided to study music and I transferred to UOP. And then I studied voice. So I did sing in the couple of operas over there at UOP. And then um, I was a performance major, but then I just kept asking questions about sound and music and how we perceive it. So I was like, okay, I think I want to go to grad school. I'm not sure what I want to do yet. So I just started taking classes and I changed my major to the general Bachelor of Arts in Music, um, just so I could take more classes that would count towards a degree. So I ended up taking classes like communication disorders. And in that class, I discovered audiology. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And I have some background in audio engineering also, so I thought it was really cool that when programming hearing aids, I am making a personalized mix for somebody with hearing loss. So I thought it was a really cool way to apply the skills I already had. Okay, so today's agenda, we're just going to talk about the difference between hearing and listening, difference in between speech and music, and some healthy listening strategies to consume music safely. All right, so for hearing, hearing is the physiological ability to receive sound. It is the ability to detect sound. Like, did I hear a sound or did I not? So it's a pretty bare bones kind of um, process where the ear picks up the sound. Now, listening is hearing with thoughtful attention, processing. So, a lot of people with hearing loss would usually say like, "Oh, I can hear when my partner is talking, but I can't understand what they're saying." So, there's a problem with detection there because of the hearing loss. Certain parts of the ear are damaged that can prevent all of that signal to go to the brain where the listening happens. So the brain is a big old processor, and it receives signals from all of the senses. And so, in order to process the sound, it needs enough information to make sense of it. So if it doesn't have enough information, let's say because there's a hearing loss, then the brain has to compensate or fill in the blanks. And that's where treating hearing loss with hearing aids comes into play. But we're not really talking about hearing aids today. We're just going to kind of talk about the process of hearing and listening. And here's some anatomy. So here on the left side is the peripheral auditory system. So over here we got the outer ear, which includes the pinna or this earlobe, and we got the ear canal here. And so the job of this structure is to collect the sound and funnel it into this channel here. In this area, sound waves exist as acoustic energy. So that is air molecules bouncing on each other until it hits the eardrum. And so this eardrum and ear bones area or ossicles, this is called the middle ear. And the primary job of the middle ear, this is my cat Belle. She wants to say hello. The primary job of the middle ear is to convert acoustic energy into mechanical energy. So when the air molecules hit the, excuse me, Belle. Whoops. Okay, cat interruption. Okay. When the air molecules hit the eardrum, then the eardrum vibrates at the same frequency at which the sound is. And so now it's acoustic energy into mechanical energy. And then that vibrates the little ear bones. So we got um, the three ear bones here, and then we have the inner ear on this side. This is the cochlea. So the cochlea is filled with fluid, and we got this little piston right here that pushes mechanical energy into the cochlea, which, um, okay, Bill, you are done with desk. um, which pushes the fluid inside of the cochlea, and it can trigger the hair cells. And we'll have some hair cell anatomy a little bit later. But this is where the most common type of hearing loss happens, is sensory neural hearing loss. And then these signals transfer into the nerve. And then we have a kind of a blown up section here of the central auditory pathway. We got your brain stem and your brain here. And so basically, if I were to sum it up, this side here on the left is the hearing portion, and this side on the right is the listening portion. Okay. Thought exercise. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? So there's a couple things we have to consider if we're going to think about this philosophy here. So the definition of sound is the perception of these airwaves, or the vibrating air molecules. And so that keyword there, perception, um, is what kind of answers this question. So if there's no one there to hear it, yes, there is a change in sound pressure level, but the perception there requires a set of ears and a brain. Uh, so yes, it makes changes in pressure, but it doesn't make a sound because sound has to be perceived. All right, so some three key differences between speech and music. So this is kind of borrowed from a Canadian audiologist. His name is Marshall Chasin, and so he's kind of like, um, I wouldn't say the godfather of music and hearing loss, but like he's a big player in that research. So I boiled it down to frequency content. So what kind of pitches are involved with speech versus music? Intensity. The intensity varies between speech and music immensely, and the purpose. So there's different purposes between speech and music, and so therefore there is different brain processes that happen when perceiving either speech or music. Okay, so speech frequency content, I have a bunch of numbers up here, but basically speech sounds can be made from 50 hertz to 8,000 hertz. And so these are just sounds from the human vocal tract emanating from the voice box all the way up into the pharynx and your articulators, the tongue, teeth, and the lips. Where 250 hertz to 2,500 hertz, this is where the vowel formants are. So A, E, I, O, U. Um, Formants is just a fancy way of saying there's different frequencies on top of someone's voice that can change the perception of the sound. So even though if I sing a single note, ooh, it's the same note, but I'm changing the formants so that we perceive the sound to be different, and it's the speech. It's those different frequencies will, since our brain is trained in the language, it tells us what is the name of that sound, A, E, I, O, U, or on a small level, And in this frequency region here is really where the power and intensity comes from. So a lot of people with hearing loss tend to have a high frequency hearing loss, and they don't have hearing loss in these areas. And that's when most people say, hey, like, I can hear you, I see your lips moving, but I can't really understand you. And so that's because a lot of the power and the ability to hear, or a lot of power of speech is in these low frequency ranges. And in the high frequency range, 2500 hertz to 8000 hertz, we have consonants, and the consonants provide clarity. And it just so happens that the consonant sounds happen to be very soft as well. So, um, like S, F, and TH are the most common, like, those are the three highest frequency sounds in English, and they happen to be in like the 4 to 6,000 hertz range. And if we're missing those, then you can see where some confusion can be. Like, did we say sit like I'm sitting on the chair? Did we say fit like fitness? Or did we say the bad word that we do on the toilet? Right. Um, Over here, I have this frequency range here, 300 to 3,400 hertz. This is kind of what's been determined as the minimum bandwidth for intelligible speech. And this was discovered by Alexander Graham Bell's team when they were inventing the telephone, because um, all of this information here, 50 hertz to 8,000 hertz, or we couldn't fit all that information in copper wire. And so, like, okay, what can we cut off to make all of that information still intelligible over the telephone? And this bandwidth here is still used today, until the advent of voice over IP or smartphone to smartphone, where this would extend up to 8,000 hertz. But yeah, this technology has been still used for hundreds of years. And so here's the speech banana. So perhaps we may have seen this with our audiograms or our hearing tests, but this gives you a kind of idea where sounds are. Um, so the letters on the screen: j, m, d, ng, u, e, n, b, o, e, a, These are all low frequency sounds between 250 and 1000 hertz. 1 to 2000 hertz, we have some of these p, ch, g, and then we have k, f, s, th. And on the bottom here, you see the pitches of where they happen. Um, from top to bottom here is intensity. So these vowel sounds are a lot louder than these consonant sounds. And but this banana shaped thing, we call it the speech banana. This is the intensity range at which these sounds typically occur in conversational speech. And to give reference, we got rustling leaves over here, dripping water, about 250 hertz, dog barking here, diesel bus, and an airplane here is very intense and very high frequency here. And bird chirps. Bird chirps are high pitched and not too intense, and then it depends on the frequency, or sorry, the distance. So this is the speech frequency content, and here is some musical frequency content. So on the piano here, we got cut off. This is like 25 hertz or 27.5 hertz at the low A at the piano, and the high C in the piano is just below 4,000 hertz. Okay. Um, and really, we're talking about the fundamental pitch in this chart. So fundamental pitch meaning what is the pitch being perceived when we push the key down, right? Um, there are other frequencies that are involved with perceiving pitch, and they're usually multiples of the fundamental, and the proportion of the proportion of the intensity of each fundamental will determine the timbre, or how the texture of the sound. For example, we can, even though we play middle C on the piano, we know it's a piano, versus when a violin player plays it, because the timbre is different, and what contributes to the timbre is the harmonics or the overtones. Overtones and harmonics are what makes brass instruments sound brassy or kind of bright, versus the few harmonics a flute has is a very round, kind of mellow sound, right? Oh, one thing I wanted to note, going back to the speech frequency content, if you were to record someone talking over time, their the average of all of the sounds would be similar to this range here. Um, Whereas if we recorded music over time, it really depends. There's a lot of variability over time. If we take the averages of all of the frequencies of a particular song, and we would know that intuitively, right? Listening to an album of Metallica is way different than listening to Beethoven, way different than listening to Miles Davis. There's a lot of different frequency contents there, just based on the instrumentation, based on the recording techniques, and kind of based on the context too. All right, getting on to the second difference between speech and music: intensity. So, on average, speech is about 65 decibels on the SPL scale. Um, and so that can range plus or minus 12 decibels. And so it depends on the speaker, but basically, if you're, I believe, 1 to 3 meters away, these SPL levels are pretty average. Um, and I have this really technical sentence here. Harmonics tend to be in distinct critical bands, and so really that just means that, let's say, your vowels don't really overlap. It's there. The harmonics are very distinct. So A, E, I, O, U is very different. You can tell because we've been trained to, while we were learning language, we've been trained to distinguish the difference between A, E, I, O, U. Whereas in music, the harmonics vary per instrument and they can overlap themselves. So that means, like, if I play a C, D, E on the piano next to each other, unless you have perfect pitch, you might not tell which one is C, D, E, because the harmonics overlap each other. Um, Interestingly, if you ever try to play a chord or a triad on the left side of the piano, the bass tones, it sounds very muddled or muddy, and it's not very pleasing. And that's because the harmonics are very close to each other, and so that causes a lot of clashing, not only in our ears but acoustically. The sound waves are not vibrating very freely, and so that's one thing we studied in music too, was the orchestration. Was let's say we have four notes in a chord, we want to space them so that there is enough room for each of those notes to ring out and not interfere with each other, and they can sound consonant versus dissonant. And on the screen here, I have some examples of of the intensities. Classical music has a big old dynamic range. It can be as soft as 30 decibels SPL, up to 100 decibels. So the softest pianissimo could be around 30 decibels. Again, this depends on where you sit in the audience, or how far away you're from it. And it can get even up to 100 to 120 decibels. It depends if you have a full Wagner orchestra, um, or even just a brass section. Or I'm thinking of now the bass drum in Verdi's Requiem. It strikes very. There's a lot of range, dynamic range in classical music, and so you think about the performers in the orchestra, right? They have to practice this. They practice with each other, and it can get very intense. And if we should consider that when we're practicing to protect ourselves. Whereas at a rock concert, it's loud, but it's consistently loud. So you fatigue to it a lot sooner versus classical music, just because of the stimulation of the ear is a lot more constant in rock music. Okay. What is the purpose of speech? Speech is an efficient communication modality. So, this is compared to like written communications, compared to drawing, compared to typing. It's a way for humans to communicate to each other um, in a timely manner. Um, Speech helps us convey thoughts, feelings, and needs. So, and again, that's part of the communication, but also the non-communication part. It fosters social connection, and you can kind of argue that music can do this too. But the primary purpose of speech is communication. So, therefore, if we think of it that way, the processes involved in processing speech is a lot different than for music, because music has different purposes, right? Um, Also, there's also left and right brain. So the left side of the brain is meant for like temporal changes or timing changes, and the right side is pitch changes. So you can actually argue that speech is left brain, and music is right brain. But there's obviously a little bit of mix of both, but there's a little bit more weighting in one direction versus the other. And this was I spent a lot of time trying to put this slide together, because the purpose of music is such a that's a philosophical question, really. And so these are the four things that I came up with. Self-expression. So if whether you're performing a piece or just doodling on the piano, or even just listening to your favorite artist, that's a way of self-expressing, expressing yourselves to either convey an emotion that you're having, or to help amplify an emotion that you're having. That kind of leads into our next one: regulate emotion. Sometimes when we're sad, we want to wallow in the sadness, so we'll put on all of the sad music. Or we can do the opposite. We can put on an upbeat song just to get our emotions into a place that we can regulate it better, and that we feel better about ourselves. um, there's a kind of newer genre of music called lo-fi, and there's been a couple studies on them where so lo-fi music is kind of defined as a down tempo kind of with hip hop vibes, and it's really meant to help focus and relax. And so the frequency content in lo-fi music is, as its name implies, it's not too dense. There's a lot of space involved. And then the down tempo aspect of it helps regulate um, the heartbeat, so that you can relax. And then there's some additional studies on that, and looking at the bigger brain waves, and there is an influence on how the music you listen to can help you focus. And so I've recently started listening to lo-fi when I needed to focus. I used to listen to just straight up ambient music, because anything with harmony, for me, as a musician brain, I would always try to analyze everything, and I would never be able to focus on the task that I was doing. But ambient music puts me to sleep, so that doesn't help me focus, but it doesn't distract me. And so listening to lo-fi for me now, it helps me to focus. I was listening to lo-fi when I put this presentation together. This next point here: integrate neural networks. So this is kind of a concept that our sister field, music therapy, works on. So you may have heard of some interventions for stroke survivors. Some people, or even severe dementia. Um, s- s- there's some examples where a person can't remember who their caregiver is, but once they started listening to their favorite song, it helped kind of redirect some of their memory connections, and then help them remember too. So there's different therapeutic uses for music, and that's the whole field of music therapy. Because music, it if you take a look at the MRI of someone listening to music or even performing music, you can see almost all of the areas of the brain are active when listening to music. The memory center, the motor center, um, obviously the pitch and timing centers of the brain. Those are all active when we're engaged in music. And then finally, entertainment. Um uh, Music is entertaining. We go to concerts. We connect with it. All right. So moving on to our safe listening practices. So over here we have a giant music festival with pyrotechnics here. Um, Probably not the safest environment to go to if you're unprotected. So we'll be talking about that. All right. So noise induced hearing loss is the most common, permanent, and preventable occupational injury in the world. And so I wanted to shed light on that. This is a quote by the World Health Organization. Um, and so by uh, by being aware of what is loud or what or how we consume music, we can kind of help prevent noise-induced hearing loss while consuming music. So, factors that influence noise exposure: number one, duration. The longer the exposure, the more damaging it can be. So I'm thinking of our festival goers, right? So um, you if you're going all day and listening to music all day, you are potentially damaging your ears. You have to protect yourself if you're, especially if you're closer to the stage. Um, and that kind of goes into proximity. Closer to the sound source, the louder it is, and intensity, the louder the sound, the more damaging it can be. So by manipulating these three factors, we can protect ourselves and consume music more safely. And these are some decibel levels to give some ideas of uh, just some reference points. So somebody whispering, that's 30 decibels. I'm pretty sure this is the SPL scale. Quiet room can be 40 decibels. I'm thinking of the booths that you are in to get a hearing test. Then we get to things like a vacuum cleaner can be 70 decibels, a hair dryer 90 decibels. Oh, I always whenever I go to a restaurant or a smoothie place, I always I look at my sound level meter on my watch, and I kind of see how loud the ambient noise is, and it varies anywhere from 70 to 90 decibels depending on when the blender is going off. And then if you notice so, places with multiple blenders, they'll have the blenders with the little cover, the little flip top there, and that makes at least a 20 decibel difference. I'm standing like 2 meters away with my watch, just like kind of listening to looking for any differences there. And I'm sure there are studies on that, but I always like to pull out my sound level meter app from my watch and just kind of measure things. Lawnmowers 110, jackhammer 130. Whenever I see road work, I always when I drive by, I'm always checking like, hey, we got our earplugs in. Um, and then firecrackers, gun blasts, these little short transient pops can be pretty loud, 140 decibels. Okay. And so we're going to get a little bit into the anatomy here. So hair cells, these are sensory cells located in the inner ear or the cochlea. There's about 15,000 of them per ear, but there's two sets of them. The outer hair cells help amplify soft sounds and helps distinguish similar sounds. The outer hair cells are the ones that get damaged first. And so when we have damage on the outer hair cells, it becomes difficult to distinguish similar sounds. So, for example, SFTH, sit, fit, or the bad word, right? We those hair cells help make those sounds in an audible range, but it also helps keep them distinct. And then the other set of hair cells are the inner hair cells, and they're responsible for converting the mechanical energy into electrical. Electrical energy is the neural energy or brain waves. It's the language of the brain. Um, and so they cannot be repaired yet. And I believe Stanford is working on that right now. Basically, we observe in birds that they can regenerate their hair cells, and right now we were able to replicate that, but we haven't done it in vitro yet. It's all in a petri dish. And there's also the problem of, if we regrow these cells, how can we program them to recognize the pitch that they are assigned to? And so there's a lot of work to be done. I'm not sure if we'll be within this generation or not that we can see a regenerative hearing, but it is in the works. And here is an electron microscope image of different statuses of hair cells, or the stereocilia of the hair cells, the little tips. And so normal hair cells look like this. They're formed in a V shape here, and they're nice and tall. See mild hearing damage. You can see there are some full-sized hair cells here, but some of them have been sheared off. And then you see severe damage. Most of them get sheared off, or in this case here, they get fused together. So these hair cells are within the cochlea, kind of floating around not floating around, but they are waving around in the fluid. I kind of think of them like, was it this, is it sea anemones or sea cucumbers? They kind of go with the waves of the ocean. And so when they bend enough, then they start the process of sending a signal. And so if the waves are violent or very strong, then these hair cells can kind of hit against each other, or if they hit hard against each other, maybe they can break off. Um, and also, some of these hair cells are attached to a membrane on top. So if that membrane gets violently shook, like from a loud sound, then it could just rip some of these off. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. So that's the physiology of the hearing damage. And how can we defend against noise? Well, there's the two main ways: is prevention and protection. So prevention includes awareness. So for me, I have a quick access sound level meter on my Apple Watch, and so I can just look at my watch and measure sound instantaneously. Right now, I'm talking at around 72 decibels. Um, but whenever I feel uncomfortable in the situation, I just look at my watch and see how loud it is, and usually it's 85 decibels when I start to feel that, oh yeah, this is kind of a loud place. And then being aware of those situations allows you to avoid those situations, or make accommodations to reposition yourself in a way that is less damaging, right? So um, if you're at a concert, um, let's do uh, the Shoreline Amphitheater is what I have in mind. Outdoor venue is pretty good. If you're in the seated area, you're closer to the speakers, so that puts you at more risk. If you're in the lawn area, it's a little bit more safe. You're further away from the speakers, but you don't have chairs, right? So as you're willing and able, you can kind of think about your strategically positioning yourself at a concert, right? So that you're away from the speakers. Um, but then you have your fanatics next to you that are screaming. That could be another issue on its own. And then where we cannot prevent, we will protect. So sound attenuators, that's a fancy word for earplugs or earmuffs. And so the sound attenuators will help dampen the sound so that when it hits the eardrum, it's at a safer level. What you can also do is reduce your exposure time. And so there are different standards of exposure. One of the safety standards is 85 decibels for 8 hours straight. Is your maximum noise dose. And then if we were to if you were exposed to 88 decibels, you'd have to cut that exposure time in half. So that would be 4 hours. and then 80 or sorry 91 decibels for 2 hours, 94 decibels for 1 hour, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, the less time you're exposed to that noise, the less damage it'll do, because damage or noise damage is cumulative. What you can also do, what we talked about, like in the concert, is increase distance. So identify your sound sources. So are you next to a guitar amp? Are you next to a speaker? Is there a screamer next to you? Well, we can kind of position ourselves so that we don't expose ourselves to potentially damaging things. And I have over here some types of earplugs. So these are the foam earplugs you can find in a big old jar from like Walgreens for like $5. And these do great. They reduce up to like 30 decibels. But if you've ever used them before, you know that things are super muffled. And so while it's great at protecting, it doesn't let us enjoy music as much as we want to. And so um, these other kinds of earplugs have been made or invented to help mitigate that. So this is the Eddie plugs. These are anywhere from 12 to $20. I think you can find them on Amazon. They are by Etymotic Research. They've been around for decades, and they're kind of a leader in like acoustic research. And so basically, we have this nice form-fitting silicone piece here, and then there's a filter here that helps make sure that it reduces the volume evenly across all frequencies. What that means really is that when you put them on, everything still sounds crystal clear. It's just a lower volume. So, in fact, um, it's things become clearer because it's in the nice range that our outer hair cells can operate in. Um, Without getting into too much detail, but when things are too loud, they sound muddy, and there's acoustic phenomenon and physiological phenomena for that. Basically, if it's too loud, it's difficult for the ear to distinguish certain pitches, so it becomes muddy. Um, and if you've ever tried to have a conversation during a concert, it's like you would have to get next to someone's ear, right? To hear, and then they'll be yelling at you, and then it's painful. So actually, if we wear these earplugs, then the loud sounds are more distinct, but then because not all of your ears stimulated at once, you can still have the clarity of your speech while protecting yourself. This one here, Loop, this is a newer brand. I think they've been around 10 years now, but rather than using a filter, this particular model just uses solid steel. And so they found out that steel has some kind of acoustic properties that are favorable for listening. I always think about like anyone who's worked with explosives. They usually have a protective, like a shield. It's usually made of heavy concrete or steel, or and that's one way to protect yourself from a blast. And so utilizing that same concept, they put it into an earplug, which is cool. But Loop also has different filters for different situations. Um, they have a soft material for sleeping. They have a pretty vast product line for different listening needs, and I can vouch for them. Over here on the right, we have some active noise canceling earbuds. So what's shown here are AirPod Pros. I did a little self study for me. I tried to measure how much sound or noise they can reduce. And so I found with the stock ear tips, they can reduce up to 15 decibels of the low frequencies, but up to 30 decibels on the high frequencies. And then if you were to upgrade the little silicone tips into foam tips, you can get even more attenuation, about 20 to 30 decibels on the low frequencies, but and still 30 to 40 decibels on the high frequencies. So while these are not meant to be ear protection, if you have them, you can use them in a pinch. It's just a way to seal out sound, um, and 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 help protect yourself. And that kind of transitions into our next one, headphones and earbuds. Um, this is kind of a point in contention for a lot of people because of the advent of consumer electronics. The use of headphones and earbuds itself does not cause hearing loss, but it only causes hearing loss when you are listening to it too loud for too long. Um, yes, they are closer to your ears, but we can regulate uh, by turning the volume down or reducing our listening time. So I have a pretty conservative guideline here, 60-60 rule. So you can consume music for 60 minutes at 60% volume as a daily dosage. And so uh, this is highly variable depending on the headphones, right? And your headphone amp. Like for me, I would never put these headphones, because these are hooked up to an amp, I would never put it at 60% because that's just super loud. But consumer electronics, like your iPhone or 60% volume, is it's like medium loud. It's just so if you wanted to consume more volume, then you would reduce your exposure time. Uh, or if you reduce your volume, then you can increase your exposure time. So just kind of use the 60-60 rule as a guideline. Um, Apple sound level. So if you have an Apple product, I think Android might have it too, but I'm not too familiar with their stuff. Uh, you can monitor the output of your headphones that are connected. And in fact, you will get a notification on your phone saying, "Hey, do you want to? You shouldn't really be listening to it this loud. You should consider turning this down." And it's pretty accurate, up to a 3 decibel kind of accuracy. So it's a good way to check yourself if you've been consuming too much music or too loud. For noise canceling, there's active and there's passive. So passive noise canceling literally means there's a physical barrier between the outside world and you. And basically, noise canceling works great for listening to music because if you can drown out the distractions by canceling them out, then you don't have to listen to your music as loud. So it's safer in that regard. Um, I always think about our Bay Area folks riding the BART. It's in the BART. I've measured it. It's like 90 decibels in the tunnel when it starts screeching, and so some people will start to crank up the music to drown out the noise. But then it's like, well, you are listening to music at an unsafe level. But if you had some sort of active noise canceling, then we can get rid of the noise and not have to listen to our music um, in a loud way. And for more information, I recommend you guys purchase this book. I think it's on Amazon, and he may have it on a PDF on his website somewhere. But it's called "Hear the Music." This is Marshall Chasin. He's the um, chief audiologist at the Musicians Clinic of Canada. But he's done a lot of decades of research and lots of presentations um, about music and hearing. And I think I'm 1 minute over time, but I am done. Questions?
All right, thank you, Jan, for that wonderful presentation. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself. All right, there is a question in the chat.
Earplugs for me if I'm already wearing hearing aids. Still have trouble hearing TV voice. So it's tough. If you're a hearing aid user, hearing aids are not meant to protect your hearing. They're meant to enhance your hearing. There are limitations on the hearing aids and such that they're not going to over amplify already loud sounds. With that being said, if you are concerned about protecting your ears while wearing hearing aids, I would recommend the big old ear muffs over the hearing aids. Modern hearing aids now have really good feedback protection so that they don't squeak on you when you have something over them. Um, but still having trouble hearing TV voice. It depends on what we're watching too, right? Oh, that's one thing I should have talked about too. The TV productions vary based on the genre. So it's a lot easier to understand newscasters because the sounds are tuned in for the voice. And more often than not, you see the person who's speaking on screen. Whereas if you're watching a drama or if you're watching football, you have tons of background noise. In the case of the drama, there's literally a person with a job of sound designer, so they will create the soundscape of the scene there, and that literally means injecting noise into the soundtrack. So ways to mitigate that is number one, if you're listening on a flat panel TV screen, it's a lot better to get a sound bar, and sound bars range from anywhere from $30 to $3,000. There's a big old range, but the purpose of the sound bar is um, to have you direct access to sound waves. Because if you're listening from the flat panel speakers, you're listening to a reflection off of the wall, and we're um, missing frequency information on that. So if you have a sound bar, you'll have direct access to the sound, and a lot of the newer sound bars also have the EQ option for speech. And so, really, what that does is it cuts the low frequencies and it boosts a little bit more high frequencies so that those speech sounds are more clear. But yeah, TV productions are they usually do not have people with hearing loss in mind when they're designing that. So one consideration for that is either getting if you have hearing aids, getting a TV box to pair with your hearing aids so you can get the signal directly into your ear, or you can get a sound bar so that the sound waves travel more directly to your ear or to your hearing aid that way. Getting a little bit closer can help reduce the amount of reverberance that you perceive in your own listening room. Um, and there's also, yeah, you can get a set of Bluetooth headphones or even TV ears, so you can get it directly into your ear. But if you have a pair of hearing aids, you should ask your provider to see if there is a TV box available for you. And I think that could help a lot.
All right, Jan, I do have a question
Yeah.
from myself. Um, so we have a lot of patients who wear hearing aids and they are musicians. So they
Mhm.
are like they either play musical instruments or they listen to music or they go to like listen, to the concert, to the orchestra. And they sometimes complain about like, oh, music sounds distorted through my hearing
Mhm.
aids. And we know that from your talk that speech and music have different frequencies, have different intensity, and the goal of hearing aid fitting is really to amplify speech.
Mhm.
Not it's not really focusing on music as much as speech. But are there any considerations for the patients themselves, like what can they do to help reduce that distortion, as well as considerations for us, for audiologists, in terms of the hearing aid fitting?
Yeah, so if you're a hearing aid user and you are in a musical situation, you have to ask yourself in the moment, what do I need right now? Am I having a conversation with my partner in this very moment I'm listening to the music, or am I solely enjoying the music? So um, if you're not having a conversation with any partners, if you're just there for the music enjoyment, try it without the hearing aids. Now, there is a lot of caveats, right? Because if you have a severe hearing loss, then you actually need the hearing aids to hear the music. But let's say you have a high frequency hearing loss, maybe moderate to moderately severe in the high frequencies. You can try it without the hearing aids and see if that helps. Um, but lowering the volume on the hearing aids can help too, because sometimes, especially with the older hearing aids, the analog to digital converter cannot handle the high intensity sounds. And so by reducing the volume, it kind of helps the amplifier out. It doesn't have to distort the signal much there. And that also goes into identifying where your sound sources are. If you're next to a speaker, it might be too intense. And if you can relocate, if possible, you can relocate, that can help with that. For the provider, um, the music programs on hearing aids now are pretty good. And so what the music programs really do is it lowers the overall gain, because we know that on average music has a higher intensity. It lowers the overall gain, but it keeps it linear, so there's a little bit less processing going on. um, the advantage of having the music program is that it is tailored to the hearing loss, so it should still provide help in getting the details, especially in the high frequencies. um, but yeah, for live situations, I think that having a music program very helps, but also being aware of your environment and repositioning helps also. Another thing that comes up with hearing aids is streaming, right? Say if I'm streaming my iTunes, and it's like, okay, my streaming sounds very thin, right? Um, if if someone's has an open fit, or if you have open domes, then we're losing some of the low frequencies for streaming. And so some manufacturers, you can compensate by having a streaming profile where you can increase the lows. But what we can consider also is having an extra set of domes. If you fit with open domes, have a set of closed domes just for listening. And then we can have the patient be proactive like that and changing their domes based on what their listening intent is.
Jeannie, do you have questions?
Yes, I have a question. Well, or a comment. Even though I have a profound hearing loss, when we do go to concerts, even if I take my hearing aids out, it's still too loud.
Mm.
But I bought a pair of those special hearing buds that block out,
Musician
but leave
plus.
the sound at a safe level, and they work beautifully. It was great.
Beautiful. I
It's
love to
wonderful.
hear that. Yeah,
Yes,
I'm such an
wonderful.
advocate for those high fidelity musician earplugs. They're life changing for me, for someone who
Oh yeah,
consumes a lot of music. It's great. I'm glad you have a great experience with that.
it's wonderful.